For our next section, we're going to be going over working with your Word templates. So I've got the previous session and this session are both ones that I'm going to be performing for Dynamics Community Summits this year for the GP side of things. And we're bringing them to you now as well. So upgrading your Word templates to visually represent the professional you is the title of this. It's a lot to go with, but you have to come up with catchy names, otherwise they don't pay attention to you. So, and the purpose of this session here is to go through and help inform you as to how to set up, how to work with your Word templates and so on. So again, my name is Sean Hunter with Turnkey since 2011 and area of expertise there. But want to dive right in. So Word templates in Dynamics GP and what they are. If you haven't used them, if you've just never turned them on, I've ran into several companies who have modified their GP reports, and those don't just automatically turn on the Word templates in the system during an upgrade and things along those lines. So if you're still using the ones that print to the screen and they don't pull up in Microsoft Word or anything, this is available to you in GP 2010 and on. They added in the Word templates for essentially everything in the system. There's ways to be able to turn, your GP reports into Word templates if you wanted to. So you could print out a trial balance on a Word form if you wanted to from GP and things like that. But the ones that they created, the actual data tie-ins that are easily accessible and kind of what they continue to add on top of is the sales invoices, orders, back orders, quotes, purchase orders, pick tickets, and those things. Keep in mind that there's a couple of these that are dependent upon the version that you're in, but like your blank of each one of these document types has a Word template, and I want to say that they've added the other in there as well, but like your short and your long forms haven't been added yet, but really those are sunsetted. They're no longer applicable with the additional Word templates, because the whole premise of those other formats that you saw underneath the drop-down for blank, other, short, and long form were so that you could choose different format types based off of the printing situation, usually by customer. And the Word templates adds in some functionality there that makes that no longer applicable. This also opens the doorway for emailing from GP, where you were linked or where you were restricted before with GP to be able to email from the application. You had to have Adobe Acrobat installed so that the Adobe PDF application was part of it, so that when you printed to screen and you selected send as, you could say send as PDF, and then you'd have to input the email address and all of that stuff. So you had to have that originally to be able to email from GP. This, of course, completely removes that need for it and introduces the ability to individually in bulk print and email documents from the system using the Word application. So Word templates also add in the functionality of being able to have different forms by customer or vendor. So if you have one customer that needs certain fields and you have another customer that doesn't need to see those fields, maybe you have one customer that needs to see their pricing and another customer that doesn't want to see pricing, maybe it's a packing slip and one customer needs to see a packing slip with pricing and another one does not. Whatever it may be, you now have that ability to set up additional fields and different looks and feels based off of the customer, either by individual ID or by a class ID. And we'll take a look at that today as we work through these. Again, mentioning that you can email and print in bulk. The ability to configure terms and conditions. If you've ever heard of him, Mariano Gomez, I believe, put together a nice script that we'll step through today just to show how to be able to add a terms and conditions page onto the end, because with the GP report writer, that was just next to impossible to be able to do anything with that. I know there were ways through coding and things like that you could, or like a mail merge, or even combining a PDF or something like that. But this makes it where you just leverage Word functionality to easily add that into it. The next one is adding a logo by company. So that's a huge plus to the Word templates in GP, is that if you do have multiple GP companies set up, Company A could have a different logo than Company B, whereas before it was extremely fun and difficult to assign a different logo by those forms. You either used a blank in the other form, or you had some sort of coding put in place by your partner to be able to handle that situation. And then the last part of course, we're using Word at this point. We're using an Office product. So visualizations, fonts, colors, graphical improvements, being able to put images on there nicely and easily. That's a huge improvement for the logos. And any other image that you wanted to put on there is that you don't end up, if you've ever dealt with it or you've heard frustration from me in previous sessions or anything, it was very difficult to get the logos nice looking on the GP report writer. They, depending on how you put them on there, and then the dots per inch that show up, the DPI settings, the logo could look beautiful to you when you viewed it, but then come out looking awful, or vice versa. So the leveraging Word obviously increases that functionality, and you no longer run into that issue with images not looking good. So we're going to go through quite a bit, and I'm going to work through this as quickly as I can as possible to be able to get as much of the information to you so that you can see it. First thing we're going to do is, hey, this is what you need to do in order to be able to work with adding new fields and things like that. So we're going to look at adding the Word, installing the Word add-in. First time use for GP Word templates, setting up your logo, setting up different forms for different customers, use the different forms, discuss how you can set it up by the different ship to addresses, and then look at the adjusting the fields and such for the Word templates at that point. And if I have time to wrap up with it before I start rolling over into the next session, I can show how to set up some of the email capabilities a little bit further as necessary, or answer any questions. So let's go ahead and get started here and work through the demonstration side of things. So first thing you're going to want to do is, if you added new fields, so you have a customized form right at the moment that you're using, but it's still the old GP form that prints to the screen through the application or whatnot, you're going to have some legwork that you got to do to get started with the Word templates. They normally just work right out of the box, and they will with the out-of-the-box version of the report. But if you've heavily customized your current GP form, you've probably got custom calculation fields, you've got other things that are on there that it's not going to translate those over automatically. So there's a discovery process that goes into activating these. In the first place, you could turn it on in the test company and see how it runs first, obviously, before you just flip the switch and everybody starts using it in production. But first thing we're going to want to do so that we can add any of those fields and make those changes is we're going to run the setup exe from our Microsoft Dynamics installation media. So you're going to have to find your disk, find the file folder, whatever it is, look out in the media folder on our GP share that we set up, and you would run that setup exe from there. And once you run the setup exe, it's just going to pop up the window to the screen. Ignore everything else in this window, but only pay attention to this one option underneath the additional products, and that's going to be our Microsoft Dynamics GP add-in for Microsoft Word. And I'm just going to click Install. And it should run really quick. So I clicked on it, and by the time I grabbed that window to show it to you, it was already done and over with. So once that's installed, now Word will have the capability of pulling in fields from our form from within GP. So our next area then is, once that's installed, how do we get started with using Word forms in Dynamics GP? So what we're going to do is we're going to drill over, and let's take a look underneath our reports dropdown and template configuration. And this one right here, this window tells us whether or not we have Word templates enabled in the first place for a specific company, for a specific module, for the specific form that you would run from there. So earlier, whenever we were going through the fulfillment process and so on, you noticed that my pick ticket didn't come out with a Word form, but my packing slip had. So that's where this setting right here is. Any of these that have the asterisks on them, those are modified versions of the form. So if you get in here and you see a bunch of things with asterisks next to them, those are my modified forms. Anything without them are the ones that I've worked with myself or whatnot. So you should see variations as you get in here and you look at these for one versus the other and so on. But natively, everything gets checked, and that's why I was saying if you're using the regular out-of-the-box GP form with zero modifications to it, you never added your logo or anything, it's just the cut and dry one, then you're probably just using the out-of-the-box form, and whenever you upgraded, all of a sudden Word templates would have just shown up. But again, if you were using the modified version, it may not have just automatically kicked those out for you right off the bat. So just be aware of that setting and these checkboxes controlling whether or not you'll have the option for printing the Word template. The other thing from this window is where we can establish our logos by company. So up in the upper left, I have images, and when I click on this, it brings up the information there for designating my logo that I want to use by company. So I would just need to navigate out from here, find that logo, and plug it into these settings here. You as a user with a shared environment with multiple users, you will want a location for your logo setup that is shared among everybody. So it'll have to be some sort of common UNC naming scheme on a shared directory, somewhere on a shared network file location that everybody could access from their computer if they had to. Otherwise, they just won't see the logo whenever they run the report. So again, just make sure that it's a shared location that that's under, that this mapping is the exact same no matter which computer you go to. If you're on terminal server, you're good to go. But if you have the individual client installs, just make sure that it is the location that everybody shares. So once I have those established, when I get into my Acuity company and I print an invoice, logo A comes up. When I'm in my Fabricam company and I print an invoice, logo B comes up. So those are the specifications in there, and it's that easy to designate those. The only other thing that you may need to pay attention to is when you're setting these things up. Let's see if I can just hop into one of these real quick to show you. You do want to make sure that your sizing is kind of appropriate whenever you get in and you're working with this. Let's just see if I can open this real quick so you can see it. So one of the things I had to do to make sure that my turnkey logos worked is that I sized it appropriately for the Word form. If this thing's massive, you know, it's a 300 by 300 or whatever, it's a banner size, it's going to look that way on the Word form. So just be aware that you probably will have to do some sizing to get this to work, or some tweaking to your Word form as you get into work with it to get it to fit with your logo. And we'll see that in a moment when I get into the actual window itself. You can see the placeholder for that logo. Okay, so once those are established, I'll say okay, and then I'm going to save that. And then the next part is to set up and use the different forms. So let me get back to my home page so we're not looking at the fulfillment behind here. And up underneath reports again, we're going to drop down and we're going to go to template maintenance now. And underneath this menu, this is where you establish and start to configure and set up and customize your Word forms. So we would come in as a first-time user. When I hit this drop down, I would not see any of these other options. The only thing that I would see is more reports, and I would click on that. Then I would use this menu to navigate and find the form that I want to work with. And I know I have a modified sales invoice form. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to find that modified sales invoice form, my blank sales invoice. I'm going to grab that and I'm going to pull that in to work with. Any of these that have an asterisk next to them, those already have some forms assigned to them. So if I was going to work with one that hadn't ever been touched before, then I can work with it and there wouldn't be any options yet for a modified sales order form or whatnot. Let's go ahead and we'll grab our sales invoice, pull that in. If things had been set up previously, you would see options already turned on for this one. If you've never set up Word templates, obviously there would be 0 options within here. To work with one of these, to set up a brand new one, you would go to the upper left-hand corner, click on New. One thing to note in this window is that you do not want to start with a blank template when you're in this window. And the reason for that is that you want to use from an existing template, because that's where Microsoft has created for the implementation of Word templates. They've created the back-end coding to tie Dynamics GP over to the Word document. So when you hit print and it goes through and it's pulling up that document, it's transferring the appropriate data over. So you want to use the from existing template. That way it gets all of that back-end coding for the information that should be on the back end of this to include in the Word document. If I just go with a blank template, it comes up completely blank, and I'd have to go through all of the steps of formatting and adding fields and all of that stuff from the start, load up my XML and all sorts of things. So as a user for these from existing template, you as a first-time user, The only option that you would most likely see out here is SOP blank invoice form template asterisk underneath the status of original. And you would grab this one to be able to work with. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to grab this one and I'm going to call it the user group one from the existing template and create. If you hadn't done anything before, now that we've got the one added to the modified, I could also come in and of course create from that from then forward. But the very beginning, you're going to pull from the original because there isn't going to be a modified version of it to be able to pull from in the first place. So once that's on here, now we can get in and modify and work with it. So I would do that before I assign it to anything because I don't know if this is going to be my final version that I'm going to work with. So I'm going to go up and I'm going to hit modify at the top. And whenever that runs, if it's the first time running Word, if you didn't have Word already pulled up, you would see it load up that Dynamics GP add-in, and you would start working with it. So the form pulls up. Now, in order to take advantage of the Word add-in, we need to add our Developer tab. So we're going to add that in. But natively, out of the box, Word does not include that because not everybody's a developer and needs to see that. It just could get people in trouble. So if you're going to be working with adding new fields to the Word template, we would hit File, Options, go underneath our Customize ribbon, and we would make sure that the box is checked for Developer. Once that's turned on, then that Developer tab shows up there, and then when it's available, then our Word add-in functionality, this right here, is available for us to use. When I click on Field List, it just adds this list over here, where now I could add and put new fields onto this document. So one thing I'm going to do is, let's say that I wanted to add a new field to this. Click into the section. Now what I like to do with mine to make it a little bit easier to work with is I've turned on my grid lines. So if I go underneath my layout and view grid lines, that's what I'm seeing whenever I turn those on. It makes my life easier when I'm in here designing it because I can see where in the world I'm placing these things. And that's one thing you have to be cautious of as you're working with these, is that you need to realize what these sections represent. So as we look at this, this is my page header. This is considered my report header. This is my items, my kit components, and then my comment sections. And these correspond directly to the GP report writer configuration. So if I was to hop over into the GP report writer, we would see these sections basically matching exactly what we see in my XML. These map to showing the data within here. So if I wanted to put something and have it show in this section, I'd have to make sure I pulled a field from the page header. If I wanted to have something populate in this section here, I'd have to pull something from my report header. If I wanted something to show down at the very bottom, that's my report footer. Comment 4, component footer, comment 2, comment 1. So you should be able to kind of follow with these. If you're curious whether or not you're in the correct section or not, you can kind of see those functioning over here on the left-hand side in the ruler. So each area that you see a dark spot right there, that's in between the table, and each one of these kind of represents its own section within there in some capacity or another. But you should be able to match these up based off of the full sections that you see out here. So from there, if I wanted to add a new field to this, I would come over to, again, my developer tab and make sure that my field list is selected. If you get in and you've done everything to get the developer to show up and this isn't there, check and make sure your Word add-in is installed. The other side is to make sure that the user security isn't preventing you from running the add-in as well. So I've got into a few environments where the administrator privileges lock out that capability for somebody to use the add-in, and they had to go in and add the security for that user to run the add-in. So just be aware if you're not seeing it, there's a little bit of legwork that needs to be done to find out why you're unable to run it. So to add a new field, we pulled up our field list, and I'm going to add the fax number to the top here. We'll just keep it simple right at this moment. So I'm going to drill down and I'm going to look for my fax number or any of the other things that are listed in here. But in this case, we're going to grab the fax number, drag that out, and populate it on the form. And then I'm going to click over here to the left, and I'm just going to add in the header for fax number. The text, whenever I drag and drop those, natively picks up whatever my Word default is. I assume that there's a way to change this. I just never have at this point. So every field that gets populated on there immediately defaults to whatever that is. In this case, it was Calibri for me. Every single Word template out of the box is automatically formatted to Trebuchet MS. And all of the formats are 8.5 with the exception of a couple like this one here and this big document ID up here at the top. So you'll have to format those as they come on. If you're attempting to format a field, click in the field, get it to show this bar up above, then click on that bar so that it highlights the entire thing. It should look like this, because otherwise you could be in the middle of this and typing in stuff and messing up the data call between the two. So just be aware that as you're working with these, if I want to select an entire field to format or to move it around, click first, get that bar to show up, and then you can left click on that bar and move that field around. And you should see it moving around like this if I wanted to move it to a different spot. So once I've got that on there and I've got it formatted, there's my new field. If I want to get rid of a field, I don't need my company name to show on there because my logo is going to handle it. I can click again in the field, get that bar to show up, click on the top so that the entire thing is highlighted, hit the delete key. Because if I click in the middle and I hit delete, you notice how it's taking characters off. Well, now I've messed up the coding. And I can't just come in and select that whole thing and just hit delete, because when I do that, you see that the field is still there. So just a couple things you have to be aware of as you're working with these. You want to make sure that you're selecting those fields to remove them. Sounds difficult. It sounds like a pain. Once you get in here and, once you're forced to deal with it, it becomes more intuitive as you go through. Okay, I got to select the field to move and work with it. Other things to note, if I need to change the header of one of these, maybe I don't want it to say salesperson ID, I just want it to say salesperson, or I don't want this to say master number, it's a reference number, whatever it may be. These are all things that came over in the programming as part of the mapping. If I want to make my own header, easiest way to do this is to just click in there, highlight, again, that value, get rid of it, and then type in your header. And you notice I don't have anything else showing up in there. To move things around, let's say that I want my customer ID to be on the left side of the purchase order and the purchase order to be over here. Easiest way to do this is to click in the field, give it a right click, split the cell, 2 columns, do the same thing for the one below. There we go. Now we've got 2 columns. I'm going to move my customer ID over here. I'm going to move my purchase order over here. Same thing. All I'm doing is clicking in, grabbing that field, holding the left mouse key down and dragging. Now I've moved those around, and now I'm going to merge those cells. Put them back together. That's the way I like to do it. Obviously, I can probably drag and move that up here and then move it back down and things like that. I found nuances in the process where it didn't always work out well. The other thing, you'll notice that my purchase order number is wrapping now. If I want to mess with the column width, just highlight in the middle. Now, one thing you have to be aware of is in Word, when you're working with columns and things like that, it natively wants to select all of the column in a row. So if I come up here and I just start moving this, it's going to shrink everything down based on the length of that row or that column line there. So in order to just move this line over a little bit to the customer ID but maintain all of this, highlight the 2 cells that contain the columns that you just want to move and then move it. And that'll just move that section isolated to itself, leaving everything else alone. So just keep that in mind as you're working with those. I've dealt with that frustration before, so passing that knowledge on to you as you work with it. Okay, so we've updated a few of those things. The last thing to note is we want to add in a terms and conditions. So to add a terms and conditions onto this, click down at the bottom below our total area. We're going to go up to insert, and we're going to insert a 1-by-1 table. So let's just make sure that we're somewhere below here. Make sure you double click, not just in the field below here, but double click just somewhere in the blank space so that it kind of looks like this. And what we're looking for is we're looking for the table to show up. So you notice whenever I was clicked before, table was not an option at that point. So just give it a double click so that you're in basically the new area below all of our other stuff. Insert a 1-by-1 table. Throw your terms and conditions in here. Something, something, something. Okay, and once that's in there, make sure you highlight all of your terms and conditions. And then we're going to go to the home, paragraph, line and page reports. And we're going to say keep lines together and a page break before. And what that's going to do is say everything in that area there, I'm going to page break before this shows up, and I'm going to keep everything together so that it just continues to roll over. And when I say okay to this, the expectation is that has rolled onto the second page, and now we have a terms and conditions page that will show up after everything else for that invoice form, in this case, has printed out. And that can be as long as you want. Obviously, it's text. It could be text. It could include everything you can imagine. Basically, everything after that page break shows up in that terms and condition. So it could be 4 or 5 pages attached to the end of that. Extremely beneficial for purchase orders where you need to have your supporting information in there about don't change my pricing and things of that sort. So pretty beneficial and easy to do that. Once I'm done with this and I want to roll this back in with the new changes as it is, I'm going to go up and hit File. I'm going to hit Save As. We're going to come out and we're going to find a location to save this. I'm going to go Browse. Let's go to this PC. Let's go to my C drive, which is overflowing apparently. Media, GP reports, Word templates. And I'm just going to put this one out here. One very, very important thing to note as I'm getting ready to do this, make sure your maintain compatibility with previous versions is turned on. It's a pain later on down the road potentially to turn that back on if you don't have the original computer that it came from. It just ensures that as user A pulls this up and then user B, maybe your customer or whatever, pulls it up, it's going to read right because it doesn't depend upon it being this specific version of Office. So just make sure that that's turned on so you don't run into any issues with somebody viewing this down the road. I felt the pain from that one where people have forgotten to turn it on. So we'll save. Now that it's in that location, I'm going to close out of here to get this to be my form now. So all the changes that we made and we saved this, it's still not the one that this is going to use. So in order to reinstate that with all of the changes that I've made, I'll hit the plus sign in the upper right-hand corner to add the template. I'm going to navigate to that area where I saved it. I don't just hit save on that. Otherwise, it saves it to a temporary folder, and it's a pain to find. So a save as and finding your location every time you save that Word template, highly recommended. Find my form. Open. It's going to tell you, hey, it already exists. Are you sure? Once that's in there, and I want this to become the form that I'm going to use for my company now, I'm going to highlight that, hit Assign Company. I'm going to go down and choose the company that I want it to be for. If it's for one, it's for that one. If I want it for both, I check the box. And then if I want this to be the default that comes up, I would set it as the default. And once that's established, it should look like this. Now, if I wanted this to be in the other company as well, but I didn't want it to be the default over there, I still wanted to use it, but I wanted it to be something else. So I could turn that on. It's not the default for that company, but maybe I want it to be the default for a customer in that company. So here I get the drop down and I can choose customer. If it was a purchase order, it would give me vendor. And here I can establish this specific form that when I print it out of the Acuity company, any customer that is in specific class, my Illinois, Missouri customers, get this form. And I'll save that. So whenever I'm in the Acuity company and I print, it's going to use this turnkey version 1 as the default unless the customer is a USA, Illinois, Missouri T1 customer. And then it's going to use this other form that just so happens to have my terms and conditions on it. So that's how I can specify it per customer at that point. One thing that I did want to show is how we add new fields as quickly and easily as we possibly can. So to do that, I'm going to navigate into the report writer in GP, customize report writer. So up to this point, we're able to add any fields that were available, move things around, remove things, add things, change font colors and font types and size and everything along those lines. But to add fields, we do still have to resort back to the Dynamics GP report writer. So I'm going to go into my reports. I'm going to grab my sales invoice form real quick, go to my layout tab, and I need to add a new field onto this. So I'm going to come in, the drop down here, let's go to the sales transaction work, and let's take the actual ship date. Not something that was available on here to begin with, but I want to include it on here just so that the people can see when the actual ship date was for this. So I throw that on there. This is the thing that I wanted to mention whenever we were looking at my Word template. Let's pull that up real quick so that you can see it working. So when I was in my Word template, those sections that I saw on the left-hand side whenever I had my XML selected, those sections directly match basically those sections that you see in the report writer. So there's my page header, report header, dummy one is a blank, so that doesn't show up, but then we've got item, component header, so on and so forth. So these directly relate to where we're placing our field. So I want to put the actual ship date into my report header because I want to put it in this section here. If I wanted to put it into the page header, I would need to make sure that this is up in here. So I'm going to go ahead and throw that up there with the expectation that I'm going to put it underneath the information in the header of my document. I could add as many different fields as I want, just again, make sure that they're in the section that you want them to be. We'll close out and save this. So I just make sure, and one thing to note is that it doesn't have to be pretty when I'm throwing it into this. You look down here, I just kind of threw stuff over the top of it. I've thrown the document ID just in random spots. As long as the field's in there, that's all that matters to me. The other honorable mention that I want to make here is that the width of your field does matter at this point. So if I got in and I sized my field to this big and went in and printed it out on my Word template, it's going to cut off where basically the data ended on this one. So it translates over based off of the width as well. So just make sure that your field widths include enough space. If you've got your Word templates printing and they're cutting off at this specific end of your item descriptions, it's most likely that reason. Real quick way to fix that, open up your report in GP report writer and just size that item description up kind of similar to what I did. I just made it huge. All right, so we've got our actual ship date up there at the top. I'm going to close out. Okay. Roll back to Microsoft Dynamics GP, and we're going to add that field onto there as quickly as we can. Then we're going to turn this loose to the rest of the group here. To bear with me while GP loads up for me. This takes a couple seconds here, as I'm sure everybody is aware. Okay. So we're back in, and we want to add that field onto this. So let me wait for my reports section to show up there again in the upper left-hand corner, hopefully, quickly. And once that's there, we're going to dive back into reports, template maintenance. Now, I can't just jump right back into the form that I was working on and modify it from there. The reason for that is that this already has basically a temporary XML loaded for it. So the way that I like to do this is I like to create versions of my forms, as you can see, V1, version 1, and things showing up here. So in order to get those new fields that I added onto it to show up and be available in my field list, I need to go up and hit New at the top, from existing template, and I'm going to use this one here so I don't lose anything else that I've done at this point, but I'm just going to add a V1 to the end of this. And what this should do is it should maintain everything that I've done up to this point, but now my field list should include that new field. So I create this, I go to Modify, Once this is pulled up, back under my developer, I've got my menu selected over here, page header, scroll down, and there should be an actual ship date in here if it actually populated right. Thought I threw it into the right section. See that? Ship method. Well, it did not populate for me. What did I miss? Yeah, I threw it into the report header and it just translated it wrong. Well. May have grabbed the wrong form as I was working with that. I'll have to figure out where that was at. But the expectation is after I've done that, that field should show up in here. And I got to track back through and figure out what it is that I broke on it to not get it to show up. But once that field is in there, and we saw how I had the kind of the document ID thrown into the middle. I think barcode was another one that I had on here, the barcode SOP number and so on. Those were all custom fields that I added. They should show up in this list over here for me to then drag into the section that I put them in. So just again, make sure that I have the correct section selected, and then I'm dragging and moving it into that appropriate section. If I move something from the page header into the section that I didn't need it to be, then it wouldn't show up for me right away. I'd have to go through and make some changes. So just be aware that it would show up in here, drag and drop, move it onto there for wherever in the world you wanted it to show up, and that would print that field. So we always have to reload those documents to get them to show up in there. We added the terms and conditions and so on to this. And if there's any other questions, feel free to plug them into here or to reach out here after. I do appreciate everybody's time today, and I look forward to catching up with you somewhere down the road whenever everything gets back to normal.